Matthew's record of the end of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount says, "It came to pass when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes."
Confirming the Church's Bible class follows the pattern of the Apostle Paul, who returned to established churches to continue teaching beyond the basic lessons of Christ and salvation from sin. How the message of Jesus applies to the circumstances of our everyday life is as important to us as is the fact of becoming a Christian in the first place. Faithful Christians help one another grow in knowledge and faith through all the stages of life. This class is presented with the prayer that it may help you to find meaning and benefit in the Word of God today and to grow in faith and service in the days and years to come.
This is the second lesson in our series considering Jesus as the Son of God. Is he truly? We're looking at the evidence. We saw last time the fulfilled prophecy, some few examples of the fulfilled prophecy of Jesus concerning his death and his early life. We have organized our evidence in our studies into four particular categories. The evidence of fulfilled prophecy. Today we're going to be looking at his teaching, and then in later lessons we'll consider his miracles and finally his resurrection from the dead, all as evidence that Jesus is the Son of God. Today, let's look at this teaching which was different from the teaching of other people. The people were amazed at the character of the teaching of Jesus. It wasn't like their scribes, that is, their regular teachers that they were familiar with in their society. Let's look at some of the examples of that teaching of Jesus. That statement that we noticed at the beginning of this lesson was at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Within that sermon, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, are statements like this in verse number 3 of chapter 5. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Well, the poor in spirit are those people that are humble, reserved, not self-serving. Blessed? Most people like that in the world today get walked over, wouldn't they? He said, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. People today think that, if you really want something in life, if you ever expect to get anything, you're going to have to drive, you're going to have to climb, you're going to have to claw and go get it. Jesus said the true blessing is for those who are poor in spirit, not haughty, bold and boasting in their spirit. So that's quite a bit different style of teaching. In verse number 5 of the same chapter, in the same sermon, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Well, the meek are those people who are submissive or willing to be submissive to authority, put themselves under others. Later the Apostle Paul wrote a letter to the church and encouraged Christians each to consider himself lower than the others. Well, that's the attitude that Jesus has in mind here. That's certainly not the attitude of the world. The teaching of Jesus was a great deal different from the character of the teaching that we typically hear in the world even today, and certainly was true in his own day. In this 5th chapter of Matthew, let's look at verse number 10, still in these what we call the Beatitudes. He said, "Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The world has always seen people persecuted for their religious faith. Some faiths, to be sure, not godly. But even those that were focused on God and trying to be his faithful disciples, sometimes were persecuted. They were in Jesus' day and immediately after. They have been through history and even until today in many parts of the world, and perhaps it seems maybe even in an increasing number of parts of the world. And yet those who are doing the persecuting always consider themselves to be superior, to be over others and having the right to rule over others. But Jesus said those who are the persecuted will be in heaven, will be blessed with that eternity with God. Certainly quite a bit different teaching from the ways of the world. There's much of that in the Sermon on the Mount. Look over in chapter number 6 of Matthew and look at verse number 19. As we begin reading there, we find this: "Lay up not for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Well, of course, the teaching of this world is to lay up treasures on earth, to lay up earthly treasures. As the man Jesus told on one occasion in a parable about a man who had a great harvest and he wanted to build bigger barns. He says, "I'll say to myself, you've got much goods laid up for many years. Eat, drink, and be merry." And that's the way the world is. That's the typical thinking of the world. But Jesus said the blessing comes to those who don't consider themselves concerned for laying up in this world, but lay up treasures in heaven. And we'll have a lesson on that sometime soon. That's a very strong and powerful concept that Jesus is presenting for us here. How do you lay up treasure in heaven? But that's not the purpose of this lesson nor of this series. We're looking at the quality, the character of the teaching of Jesus and how it points to His identity as the Son of God. He was a much more righteous, moral, even wise teacher than we typically find in the world. There was something different, something unique about the teaching of Jesus. And perhaps among the most well-known of these statements from the Sermon on the Mount would be over in chapter 7 and verse number 12, what's very often called the Golden Rule. Jesus said it this way: "Therefore all things whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets." To fulfill the law of God, to fulfill all the encouragement and exhortation of the prophets, look at it this way: you do to other people what you want people to do to you. How do you want to be treated? Well, then that's the way you go treat other people. It's so strange in this world to see many people who are abusive of others, disrespectful of others, even hateful of others, and yet expect the whole world to come and love them and to do good things for them. It certainly isn't godly. Jesus taught us a better way to live, a better way to do for others, a better way to live on this world before God, frankly, a better way to benefit ourselves from the lifestyle that we have chosen. His teaching said something about Him that wasn't noticeable in other people. Jesus was different. As we leave the Sermon on the Mount, we follow through the life of Jesus and we start looking at His parables. And we could look at many of the parables that Jesus taught, but they all show us His wise observation on life, on human nature, and draws conclusions and lessons for us that are always easy to understand and worth thinking about. In chapter 13 are several of these parables, chapter 13 of Matthew. The one we want to look at first, it begins in verse number 3, and it's that familiar parable of the sower. "Behold, a sower went forth to sow," Jesus said. "And when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them up. And some fell on stony places where they had not much earth, and forthwith they sprung up, because they had no deepness of earth. And when the sun was come up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them. But other fell on good ground, and brought forth fruit, some 100-fold, some 60-fold, and some 30-fold. Jesus said, who has ears to hear, let him hear. He's telling us, you've got 2 ears, use them. You got something between those ears, use it. Understand the message. Well, the apostles later asked him, what do you mean by this message? And so he told them, it's preaching the gospel. And some of that seed, some of that word that you preached falls on good, honest hearts, and it produces well, but some of it not so much. Some of it's ignored and rejected altogether. Some of it seems to take root for a while, but then it doesn't produce. It doesn't stick around. It doesn't help the person in the long run. And isn't that true about most things in life? You don't have to be teaching the Bible to understand that. If you've been a school teacher, if you've been an instructor on a job trying to train new people to something, you understand that sometimes they just don't get it at all. Some grab it immediately and run with it, and some others seem like they're struggling to get some of it, but then it just doesn't stay with them, maybe because they get distracted by the world, or they just don't have enough interest to stay with it. Jesus knew these things, and He explained them to us in simple ways that we could understand. And so He used the simple things in life to teach very profound lessons. Another parable in this 13th chapter of Matthew is that found in verse number 44. Jesus said again, "The kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field, the which when a man hath found, he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field. And again, the kingdom of heaven is like to a merchant man seeking goodly pearls, who when he had found one pearl of great price, went out and sold all that he had, and bought it." Well, we're all familiar with buying and selling, trading. We understand the concept. We understand the platform or the mechanism of the lesson here. But what Jesus has taught, of course, in the lesson is that's how valuable the kingdom of God is. If this man's business was to find the best pearls in the world, would he not possibly go sell everything to buy that one pearl that was absolutely the top value in the whole world? He would go to great lengths and great expense to have that. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is that way. You should have that kind of thirst for the kingdom of heaven that man had for that pearl, because the kingdom of heaven is worth that much to your eternal soul. It's worth having at any price. Jesus is saying, pay the price for it. He's not teaching us how to be salespersons. He's showing us the value of heaven. A remarkable teacher. Jesus is the Son of God. We can see that in so many ways as we read through the Bible. We're not suggesting in these lessons that any one point that we're making, any one class that we have in this series is all in itself conclusive of the identity of Jesus. But each one points in that direction. And taken all together, they are a very formidable mountain of evidence. Jesus Christ is the Son of God, who came into this world to pay the price that you and I owed God. That is His very life. Because all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And the wages of sin is death. And Jesus came to ward us off of that spiritual death, that separation from God, but to pay the price that you and I might be together with God in heaven and be forever blessed by Him.
Vainly we seek after men for guiding light, or in dreams for a heavenly call. Man of himself cannot set his soul aright, so it's back to the Bible for it all. Back to the Bible, the God-given Bible, for grace and duty, great or small. Each one may know what to do and where to go, but it's back to the Bible for it all. If we the true and the living way would learn, and be safe when the night shadows fall, we must the will of the Savior truly yearn, and it's back to the Bible for it all. Back to the Bible, the God-given Bible, for grace and duty, great or small. Each one may know what to do and where we go, but it's back to the Bible you and me. It is back to the Bible for it all. Back to the Bible, the God-given Bible, for grace and duty great or small. Each one may know what to do and where we go, but it's back